Doop, 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 doop.
Mrs. Fowle, do you have a problem getting into Zoom?
No,
Did it ask you to log in with your email address or anything, or just log?
no,
Okay, you got some
No.
people having
just
trouble.
went on the link that Debbie sent.
Okay. Thank.
You gotta put the thing behind it so it's not leaning towards the ceiling. Where's that? Get that thing out of the box. This is not.
How's it going, Anthony? I think you're on mute. Hey, Scott?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I couldn't sign into the other meeting.
Yeah, that's what I'm hearing too, but you didn't have a problem with this one?
Nope. So it had to be something in that link that
Mhm.
you sent.
Huh. Okay.
It says I wasn't authorized to be there.
Did it ask you to sign in?
Yes, it did, and I put my BOCES account in, and
Yeah. Still didn't work though, huh? Okay.
yeah, so I don't know what it was.
Thanks for the heads up.
Scott, I had the same problem. It's Tony.
Okay,
Try
Tony.
to sign in, Anthony, and you couldn't get it?
Correct. I was able to get into this one, but I couldn't get into the first one. It took me 15 minutes. I gave up.
I did too, so.
I'm sorry about that.
No
Scott.
problem.
Scott, Gary Porcelli, same issue.
Yeah, it was a bum link. Hey, Gary.
How you doing, guys? I'm a bum. I still couldn't get in.
It was a bum link.
It was a bum link, all right. How's it going, Mike? Oh, you shaved.
It fell off.
It fell off.
Go. Did you get pushed to get rid of it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, at least you know she wants to be near you, Michael.
That's a good thing.
Yeah.
How you doing, Elaine?
Doing okay.
You going to Florida?
Actually, I'm going the Sunday after Thanksgiving just for 5 days. My
Whoa.
granddaughter's going to go down there and swim with a swim team. She's going to use my house.
Be careful, Elaine,
I know.
please.
I just go stay in my house. I talked to the person who takes care of my house today, and she said, you know, everything's pretty good. She said you don't see any difference from before, but the reports say that there's difference.
Well, if you drink enough Clorox, you'll be fine.
Right.
I prefer the minty taste of Lysol.
What a group.
Hey,
Just
John.
What a group.
Oh my gosh, John Salerno.
How's Mr. Salerno today? Yeah.
Can't hear John.
Hi, John.
Hey, John,
Hi.
how are you?
John, you're on mute.
Huh?
Oh, no, I guess you're not on mute. Hi. We all
I'll
said
be right
hello.
back.
How come you're not in Florida?
No, I'm doing Christmas shopping and trimming my house.
Let me know when you go. I'll go with you.
I'm going 2 days after Thanksgiving. But if you want to come during the winter, John, really, I'm going to be down there by myself. So if you want to come for a little bit, that'd be great. I got a room.
I don't see anything. I don't hear anything.
I was so excited to hear, Elaine, about your trimming the house. I just love this time of year. I'm such a
Oh,
sucker
if you look
for
at
it.
my screen, see the back of my
Thank
fireplace?
you. It looks beautiful.
Yeah.
Love it.
I even trimmed outside myself, put
Mm.
things
Uh-oh.
on those bushes.
Good
Nice.
for you, but I hope you didn't do it today. The weather's been.
Yesterday, within the snow, I had to do the bushes. My son-in-law did around the porch, but
Mhm.
I did the bushes.
Can you come over to my house and do the trimming outside?
How funny would it be if Mike woke up, he's drinking his cup of coffee, and he looks out his window and there's Elaine running around his
$50
lawn.
an hour, Mike. That's pretty cheap.
Oh, Lord help us. That is some funny stuff.
Gotta hurry up and get your trimming done outside before we get a lot of snow, Elaine. So that's,
Yeah, I got my outside done.
that's good.
It always happens that I wait too long and then it's snowy and everybody's having a problem, and so
Right.
it was nice last week, so we got at it.
Sure. Nice.
more people getting on.
How many people at your hearing?
Okay,
no,
right. I'm looking for it.
0.
Open it.
No one came, just the required people who had to be
Yeah.
there, but
Right. No, I didn't think so.
yeah.
They probably knew the code.
It's on, oh, mine is unstable.
Yeah, it was secret code.
How you doing, Tony?
Just trying to find out where
Doing
my,
well, thank you.
You looking good.
Fisherman, Tony?
All is well, thank you.
So Tony, are we looking at trophy fish behind you, or are those lures on your wall?
A couple of each, to be honest. Couple of each.
Nice. So I just want to see, do we have us all here yet, Deb, or no?
I was just checking that myself.
Okay.
I don't see Mrs. Irvin.
Oh, look at that.
Charlene.
I'm
Look
here.
at that.
Hi, Charlene.
Hi,
Hi,
Everybody.
Charlene. How are you?
good. How are you guys? John, I see you.
Sammy?
There's Michelle. Haven't seen Michelle in a while.
Michelle, you have like a side bang going on and possibly a shorter cut. It looks great.
No, it's just a been clean all day look.
I like it. I like the swoopy thing.
Yeah, that's
I'm
over it. My children
Oh,
should go.
Here you are, Michelle. I didn't see you.
I relate.
No, it's my son's birthday today, and so we had 2 friends over. But it's different, How do you celebrate, right?
Right. It is.
What are you gonna do?
It is different. Okay, I think we have probably everyone here that is supposed to be here this evening. Deb, do we have everyone? We're missing Yvonne, I think, and Doreen already called in. And Deb, you're muted, so we can't hear a thing you're saying.
I don't see Mrs. Irvin, but I know Mrs. Corbin's not attending.
Gotcha.
Okay. And, oh, Russ, you're in. Good, okay. And Mike Moore, you're here.
I'm
Wonderful.
here. I turned my video off to save battery.
Yep, that's great. No worries. Okay, so Mr. Boucher, I think we are ready to go.
We need to call to order, and we'll start off with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
Of the
United States of
States
America, to
Republic
the republic for which it stands,
One
one
nation,
nation, under
under
God,
God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
for all.
All right, great, thank you. Welcome all. So we had an exciting meeting at 4:15. Playing with Zoom, right? So, all right, so we start off, Doctor, with recognition. We don't have any today that I'm aware of. And then we're going to go on to the recognition of our closed meeting for COVID-19. We have to let people know this meeting is on live on YouTube. And then we'll move on to communications and communications from the floor. Doctor? Nothing there, right? Nothing communications from the floor or correspondence. So that means we're moving along very quickly here to the district superintendent's reports.
Yes, so I will start with the COVID-19 update. As you are aware, and I know I have shared in some board updates, that the governor has developed a micro cluster strategy for New York State. Can everyone hear me first? I just want to make sure that I'm heard. Can you all hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah.
So the idea is that as spikes occur anywhere within New York State of COVID, there are measurements that are used to identify a rate of infection. And then if certain thresholds of infection are met, that area is kind of put on pause, like we used to be when we called it a lockdown back in the spring. And you can reopen or access levels of reopening depending on testing that's done throughout the region. And if enough infection rates decline, then that region can begin to unpause again. So areas of New York State are in 3 zones. Well, either not in a zone at all, which currently is where we are. You can be in a yellow zone, which is just like a caution light. It's like slow your roll. Things might have to change and you have to start a testing protocol. Then there's the orange and red zones, and the red being back to a full pause. Now this creates a challenge for New York schools. Not so much if we were in a red zone, which would not be good, because we would all immediately go into remote learning just like we were used to. But if you're in the other zones, orange, a little bit, and definitely yellow, you have an option to stay open and continue to provide in-person instruction in schools if you can test 20% of your population of students and staff. It used to be weekly, and that's been changed to bi-weekly, so there's some good news there. We're finding that to be very challenging in this region. And I'm going to just share some of the challenges with you and let you know we are continuing to work our way through it. The first challenge is capacity. In some counties, the Department of Health has more capacity of staff, and they were in a position to be able to order the free tests that came through from New York State and put testing programs in place so that as a community went to a yellow zone, they could roll out staff to test. Oneida County is not in that position. And frankly, their DOH is dealing with a lot of contact tracing that's surrounding all of the COVID cases. So we won't be able to necessarily rely on that option. And there are many across the state that's happening with a lot of departments of health. It's not unique. That leaves schools with 2 options. One is to try to work with local healthcare practitioners, those who may have ordered those free tests, and see if we can set up testing programs through those groups. Our BOCES Safety Department has been doing research on behalf of our region and our region schools into that option. It's tricky. The state tests are kind of in pockets with different practitioners, and there aren't that many of them that have been ordered. Not enough to support the capacity of a full 20% for many of our districts, if not all. The other challenge with the testing is that you have to access a test, whether it's a free test or a paid for test. You have to get your hands on tests. Whether, let's say Elaine was going to provide the test and I would go to her to get my test, I have to be able to access the tests. Then I have to be able to make sure that the data is collected and reported to the Department of Health on all the people who take the tests. And they use a system called eClares to do that. So if we were to go to an outside healthcare provider and they were to do the tests for us, we may or may not have to pay for the cost of the test because they may or may not have one of the free test kits. Then there'll be a charge for the data input because it requires their staff to put in all the data for every single person we send them to test. And 3, we would have to pay for the cost of their staff to provide the tests. So right now, the price points are landing at about $75 per person per test. So you can see where that could be cost prohibitive. Another option might be for schools to do the tests. In order for that to happen, the school would have to access a lab service. It's like a permission or a certificate. And that allows you to access the state's eClares data system. Now you can apply for that as a school. They allow you to do that now because of this yellow zone testing. And they also said that if your local Department of Health has one of those lab access, there's a name for them, LSLs, I just can't remember the name off the top of my head, that the Department of Health has to let your school use it and access theirs. So I've reached out to the Oneida County Department of Health to see if they have that. I don't know that they do, so we're waiting to hear back. If the DOH doesn't have one, then schools would have to apply for their own. And the kits are set up that you can self-administer and you easily can administer for children. You don't need a medical license to be able to give these tests. It's the swab. The test goes in a little bag and within 15 minutes, you know if it's positive or negative. So then the school would have to get that access to that test. They would have to get that lab certificate license thing. Then they would have to have staff to do the tests, and they would have to have staff to input all the data. It's not impossible, but it is time, it takes time to do this. So that's a possible option. But access to those tests is fastly going away, right? Like, so as different parts of the state become orange or red, that's where all the tests are getting deployed. And you have to order them in advance, and you're on like this waiting list. So right now there are schools in New York State that are currently in either yellow or orange zones, and they're still waiting for their tests, and they're still waiting for their lab site licenses.
I had a couple of questions.
Yep. Okay. So
Sorry.
I will say this before questions, and I love your questions, so I'll get right to there. I apologize. So I think in this region, as within much of the state, we'll probably have to fold into remote learning first, and then try to coordinate to get a hold of this the tests and ramp it out. But there's an incentive to starting in the first 2 weeks. If you can start testing 20% of your population in the first 2 weeks, then you only have to do it bi-weekly versus weekly. So I'm meeting with the superintendents tomorrow. I have an additional phone call into communication into the Department of Health, and the safety department at BOCES has been working for at least 2 weeks now on researching all of this. So I think they'll be able to give our region answers and suggestions for next steps. So Mike, questions?
2 questions.
Yes.
2 questions. One of them has to do with cost. You mentioned $75. Does that include the cost of the test?
Yes. So if, for example, if we go to a provider who doesn't use the federal tests, we have this option. If we use a provider who uses their own, it's not their own, but like the non-state tests, they can come to our site. They can come to our schools, or let's say they come to the BOCES, and they would set up shop at our location. They would provide the staff, the data entry, the lab access, all of it. They would do it. We would pay the fee, and we could test the number of people we need to test at any one time. So we're currently looking into that as an option. It's cost prohibitive, but they can see up to 500 tests per day, 5 days a week. So that would give our region a testing capacity of 2,500 tests per week. At that $75 per test, that would really limit the number of students any school could really bring back, but it is an option, maybe a more expensive one.
Okay, second question. SUNY Poly is doing pool testing. That saves money. Can we do pool testing?
I don't know off the top of my head. I think safety would know that answer. And I feel like it's not a yes. I think you can do pool testing, but my understanding is that I don't know if it applies to the yellow zone. So I will look into that for you, Mike.
Sure.
I just
It's
don't
like
know.
a pool test every classroom basically as a pool, and then
Yep.
it cuts down costs significantly.
Correct. Same thing though. I think you have to get the tests, and you have to do the data and the pull of all of that. The interesting part about this is in a pool test, you take an entire swath of population. It could be a grade level of classrooms, and they all provide, it's like a quick sample saliva test. And if there's and you don't know who's who. And if there's a positive in there, then you have to go back and you target that pool you tested and make them go get COVID tests. Where I'm not sure it works for this purpose is that schools have to actually prove that they have randomly pulled and successfully administered COVID test specific person-to-person tests for 20% of the population. So I think that's where the pool might not work. But I will ask the question. It's a great question. Thank you.
Dr. Kilburn?
Yes, Steve.
So how long did the county give you an idea how long it would take for them to respond to you because you asked them about being able to use a part of their facility or something to help facilitate this, because it sounds as though of all the options you were laying out, if they have that licensing or operation, that sounds like something that certainly we have the skill set to use that tool. So that way we're not spending $75 per person, but are able to still keep schools open.
It's like a limited lab license. So it's not a place, it's like a thing, like an access, I think. I have reached out to them this week with an email to see if we can set up a meeting. I haven't yet heard back, so I'm expecting to at some point, but not every Department of Health has that. So what I don't know yet is whether Oneida County has that or not. But they haven't given me a time frame on response yet, and I'm sure they are swamped.
Steve, I don't believe they do, because at MVCC, we had to test every student, both in the dorm and those who were commuting, before the Thanksgiving vacation.
Right.
And I'm sure if the county had it, they would have done it. But we had to bring some to upstate and do some other things to get them tested.
Yeah.
So maybe, but you know, any day they could get it. How far away are we from the yellow zone? We have no color code at this point.
0.7. I think we're 2.7%.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And what does it have to be?
3.
Oh, okay.
We're very close, Elaine. Elaine,
Yeah.
can I ask you, at MV, do you know if there was a cost per test that MV had to pay?
We did not, he did not mention a cost.
Okay.
Our problem was because we had no cases. Our dorm, all this time, 300 kids, didn't have one case, and we were testing every 2 weeks. We
Yep.
tried to get out of all the commuters and stuff, and state ed would not let us get out of it. So
All right.
I have a couple questions that
Yes,
I
Michelle.
wrote down. Just so are we allowed to suggest using insurance and then paying whatever the insurance doesn't pay per person? Is that, I don't know.
Yep.
Is that
That's
something?
great. It is a great question. We've actually been asking it. The problem is that insurers don't necessarily cover if the person isn't symptomatic and they don't have a prescription for that test. And the way that this testing is set up, it's not prescription based. It's not symptomatic people. It's general population.
now, Trish, would you think that we're going to go all virtual? If we're 2.7 out of 3, I mean,
Well,
we
I think,
can
yes.
make that decision to do that.
Yes, we can make that decision.
7, right, because New Hartford sends some information out that, and our sense here is that it's going to just all go virtual.
So here's where it's challenging. Yes, I mean, currently our region schools, we don't have a testing program ready to go. So
Right.
if yellow knocks on our door, we have no choice. We have to go remote and then have to figure out a way that we can test to reopen or hold tight and wait for the metrics in the region to go up and then reopen. 2 points have been raised with that, which are interesting. One has been, if the threshold of infection is doubling and tripling as fast as it is, right? Like, so if that daily rate of infection is accelerating at this rate, and we try to reopen and test, the rate of acceleration of infection might force the whole region to go to an orange or a red anyway. So we will have spent that money on testing and to no end. So that has been one point.
So let's,
Yep. Now, the second thing that came up though is that if we can't get a large enough pool in our entire region of people who are not infected, then our metrics look like we have more infection than we may really have. And the ability of the region to unlock and reopen will be slowed down. So, you know, there's an opportunity for schools to play a positive role in this because really, truly, there's not a lot of infection spread happening in schools. We're getting cases, but there are people coming in and getting infection elsewhere. So there's an opportunity to possibly help by providing a pool of people who aren't infected testing, but we just can't coordinate to get that testing. And to your point, Steve, if our local Department of Health had a limited lab license and could share that with us and the data and hook us up to actual tests, then yes, I think some schools could just run through and do it. But I don't know that Oneida County is positioned in that way.
We may not be able to pull it off logistically fast enough.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
So-
time there, but by the time you get it,
I think Tony wanted to speak next, and then Gary Porcelli, and then Michelle.
Thank you, Dr. Kilborn. If the school is doing the testing, is it exclusive of just students or any affiliation with the district?
So it's not exclusive of just students. So it's your students and your staff. So if you want to open your doors, it's your students and staff. One question we have not received clarification on is if you go remote and you want to have, like, let's say your teachers go in and teach from their classrooms, do you have to test those people? we've heard two different things. So we have some feedback from a government agency saying, oh no, you're not in person, so you don't have to test the staff that come in. And we have another group who's saying, oh no, they're in a yellow, or they're in a red zone right now, and they were told, oh no, the state said any boot on the ground has to be tested. So we're still trying to discern some of that.
Okay.
Gary Porcelli, you're next.
Thank
Dr.
you.
Porcelli, you're welcome.
I just wanted to mention, Dr. Kilburn, that last summer, I can't remember if it was Congressman Brindisi or Senator Griffo, but somebody did set up a testing at the Tabernacle Baptist Church. I was tested there, fortunately negative, but I don't remember any cost to me, and I don't know how the politician did it, but it might be a resource for you to look into. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to just write that on my notes page. And Michelle Anderson, you had a question?
So about the whole testing and maybe not being able to get on the list before the boom, which is clearly sort of coming our way. Yep. Would it be beneficial to still get on the list for when the curve breaks and we start to go down? And you know, I feel like they're probably going to mandate us to make sure we're healthy on the way back down, right?
I think you're probably right. That's we're definitely not going to stop looking into this and trying to make it happen that we have some way to test at some point, because Michelle, to your point, I think that's very possible that we're going to end up having to do it in one way or another. But what we can't do is order the state tests. There's two things. One is that there was a deadline for ordering tests. So, and schools weren't ordering tests. Department of Health and agencies were. So that deadline's passed, but I've been told that you can still order, but now you've got to get that lab license first. So what that would mean is once we figure out if we can coordinate through our local Department of Health, if they have a lab license, then we don't have to worry about that. If they don't have that license, then we have to talk with the schools in the region and see, do one of us open up a license? And then, you know, we've talked about whether or not BOCES should be providing that to districts, and that's gotten some positive feedback, but it's also raised a lot of questions like, you know, BOCES is located here. That might be challenging for some school districts. What might that look like? You know, if it's 20% of a very limited pool, that might be possible. If it's 20% of its total student population, it's not possible. We have to remember we have very diverse districts. So we have districts that are small, and we have districts that are really large. So how this plays out in our region is really going to depend on each district.
Well, we definitely have, to your point, we have a variety of districts, but we have certain districts that are a little bit more able to do more of the in-person instruction. There are other districts where, you know, it's going to be far off. Yep. So we can sort of start to categorize the needs of the most eligible schools, if you will. The other question I have is, you had said 20% in person. Is that students and teachers, or is it 20% teachers, 20% students?
So
I heard the 20 and 20.
So I have to check my understanding of this, because when it was first released, it was 20% aggregate, but then the state was concerned because in some cases people kept testing their employee base more than the student base because that's their regular people, and the state had talked about shifting that. They just released guidance a few days ago, Michelle, and that may have split it, that you had to have 20% of each pool, and that I just don't know yet. But I know that you have to test both. You can't say I'm only going to test students and not staff. You have to test both, but I don't know if it's 20/20 or a mix, total aggregate 20%.
And is that in person, boots on the ground? So you 20%, let's say you have 20% of your 100% that are virtual. So you have 80% left on the ground. You only do 20% of the 80?
You do 20% of the people who will be coming in person. 20% of those who will be in person.
Okay.
And I should throw in the caveat we all should be used to, all of that can change right now. So this could be obsolete right now. We might find out we have to test monkeys while riding a giraffe under the moon.
I guess in speaking of all this information and hearing this, I think it would be beneficial to really get serious about making sure we're on the list and can move forward should something break or, getting on that list.
I guess I'm kind of curious about what list you're asking about.
Oh, the lab list and
Okay.
pushing forward with that and trying to get some tests available.
Yeah, so
And we can outsource them if we don't need them to someplace else. I mean, not that you want to do that, right? Like you want to build for your own 12 component districts, but if we get in a situation where we are doing well and, if we come out of the curve quicker, yeah, I'd much rather have the stockpile, if you will, than not.
yeah, and I don't know that, I think your questions are on point. I think there are going to be a series of questions. As of tomorrow, I'll know more about how we want to approach that when I speak to the superintendents. My concern is that there is no stockpile, and that's what I'm hearing. There's no stockpile of tests. Hopefully we're wrong and that we can get on a list and a flood of tests will come to us at some point. But I throw that out to the group because I want everyone to have that understanding that if you see that, like for instance, in Oneida County, many schools are going remote, and like a county or two over, they have a full testing program in place. There's a lot of different reasons for that. And much of that has to do with the capacities of the departments of health. So I bring that to your attention. Michelle, I think you're on the mark with that, that we have to look at the testing capacity. We can't just ignore it. We have to address it. And whether that ends up being with schools testing or using healthcare partners or using our Department of Health, that's what we're trying to ascertain right now.
Well,
Okay.
I think you're doing what you need to do. So
Yep.
keep going. It seems like you're covering all the bases.
Yeah, it's
We're
very
trying.
super.
Yeah.
We're trying. So what I want to do is move into the next section, which is the state education department update. In general terms, a lot of it really has to do with COVID, just that our state education department is trying to work with the State Department of Health. That's not been an easy relationship because the Department of Health is just motoring, they're just like, they're all very busy and working very hard, I'm sure. But the State Department of Health is creating a lot of regulations for schools that aren't playing so well in schools. And this COVID testing is a prime example of that. So our region had an opportunity, our superintendents had an opportunity through Senator Joe Griffo to meet with Interim Commissioner Betty Rosa, which was wonderful. And I thought that was great for the region, and I certainly appreciate Senator Griffo's bringing that together. Apparently, it's something he's done in the past with Mary Ellen Ilya also. She just wanted to stress that the state, New York State Department of Education is trying to advocate on behalf of schools. They're working closely with Department of Health, at least in their attempts to communicate with Department of Health and encourage a good neighbor relationship, and stress to the Department of Health that they would like to be of service to them. And they also talked with us about something I'll be bringing up in a presentation next. But they're also trying to work with our Division of Budget, and I want to explain that a little bit. And that's regarding the state aid withholdings we're hearing about. The most recent and kind of upsetting one has been the Division of Budget not approving transportation aid for school districts that use their buses or retain their bus drivers while we were on pause last spring. That's created a lot of ill feeling in the education world, and I think we can all understand that. So I want to explain this briefly so people have an understanding of it. When money from the state, so the state budget is enacted, that money all flows through the Division of Budget, which is part of the executive. It's part of the governor's office. It's across the street from state ed. And no money gets released to schools that doesn't first go through Division of Budget. And SED, now they have a budget, they kind of knock on the door. And so state education department says, hey, we need the 2 billion whatever, or 5 million whatever for computers or buses or whatever it is. And they kind of go across the street, knock on the door, and Division of Budget has to approve it. They release the money to state ed, and then it goes boop, out the door to the schools. It's kind of how it works. In regarding transportation, legislation doesn't allow the Division of Budget to release the funds for transportation aid because there is no writing in the statutory language around transportation aid for the use of that money for anything other than transporting children to and from school or for educational purposes. So all the schools did what we were told to do. We had to provide meals. We had to provide remote work. So school buses were used to put packets of schoolwork on to get over to kids. And school buses were used to deliver meals. And school buses were used to provide wireless access. Some districts parked buses out in the middle of the country so people could get wireless access. So that's one part. So schools were doing their good faith effort that we were told to do and use the buses. The second part has to do with the governor and his structure of pause. So if you remember, from March until May, schools had to wait every 2 weeks to find out whether or not we were going to open. So districts were really not in a position where they could furlough, well, and that's another story, but they lay off, I would say, employees only to try to recall them back 2 weeks later. It doesn't really work that way. So they had to retain them. So that's the second part. And the third part was the language and spirit of the CARES Act. So that CARES relief, that pandemic relief money from the federal government, stipulated that this is meant to avoid having to lay people off. So schools really did their part. Many feel, and I don't disagree, that this is disingenuous. So the state education department is really pushing for statutory language changes that would allow that aid to then be activated and released to the schools. So I want to just fill you in on that. We'll talk more about state aid in just a few minutes, but I wanted to share that piece of information about SED, how it's structured, how it works. Many people get upset about that and they knock on the door of SED, but it's not SED that's setting up the rules, and it's not SED that's holding back on the payments. That's coming through division of budget, and it relates to statutory language. Are there any questions about that? Okay, so great conversations with Interim Commissioner Rosa.
Oh, I have one question.
Sure.
Do we have, if we don't get that reimbursement, how much are we out? Like,
Well,
can we handle what we may be missing if they don't pay us?
So as a BOCES, we're not really impacted by that because we
Okay, good.
provide transportation services.
Okay.
Now, to our component school districts, that can be significant. Transportation costs are not cheap, and transportation aid is high. It's often like, I think 96% or something like that. Tom, am I about right on the ballpark on trans aid? You're muted, Tom. Oh, there you
Yeah,
are.
it could be that high in some districts and for districts.
So this hurts, and we're going to see a presentation that really, I hope, will demonstrate the potential impact of COVID on some local school districts in general terms. Also, the Board of Regents and Interim Commissioner Rosa were talking about trying to better understand remote instruction. Really wanted to hear how is it working in different districts, and very concerned about equity in general, technology access and equity, which we discussed in our last board meeting, but also the student experience and equity. What does a robust curriculum look like, and what opportunities are some children getting that others cannot? So those are kind of some big ideas on state ed's mind right now. Any questions about the state ed update? Okay, so I'm going to move right into, I'm going to share my screen and move into a presentation that was shared with us as superintendents, and it had to do with this, state aid. So let me download this real quick. I'm going to try to download it, but my chat screen's in the way. Bear with me, everybody. I'm going to try to open this in PowerPoint. Okay. There we go. So at our DS meeting, district superintendent's meeting, I apologize, in October, just as a point to kind of make sure everybody was on the same page, and as a resource that we could use with new superintendents and to help boards if they wanted it, to look at state aid and the impact of some of this, the information I was just sharing with you with these withholdings, what could be potential impact on schools with some of that. So let me go through this with you, and if you want to have some questions or dialogue afterwards, certainly we can. So the first thing I want to talk about is the history of foundation aid. I'll be very brief. But in 2009-10, in the Great Recession, foundation aid was frozen, and I think most of you are aware of that. And schools really suffered during that time, and money was kind of gutted out of budgets, which is now happening again. So that was called the gap elimination adjustment, and it helped the state address a gap in its budget by taking it from schools and some other places, which put the state in this position where they had to try to phase in or return those monies to schools. But it wasn't like you're going to get all your money back. It's like, we're going to try to make you whole, but we can't pay necessarily for anything you lost over the period of years. And they ended that adjustment, the gap elimination, in 2016-17. And this is what the full phase-in looks like. And I wanted to show you the screen for a reason, and I apologize because I'm trying to like move the box of all of us around so we can all see the screen. So most school districts are here, which means that they're kind of close to where they should be in their state aid now, eventually. It didn't all happen overnight, it took years. But you'll notice there are some school districts in the state who are actually receiving more state aid than they should be, well over 5 million. And unfortunately, and you might be able to see it on your screen, all I can see is our faces, but way down here are school districts who are like $20 million underfunded. And that's a lot of our city school districts, like our big five: Rochester, Syracuse, Yonkers, Buffalo, and New York. But what you should notice is that in spite of so many districts being here, there are many, many, many districts who still are not whole, right? They're still underfunded. Now, it's important to know that because there was a lot of conversation in the past 2 years about tweaking the foundation aid formula. The formula is very complex, and there are financial experts who have gone through that formula and tweaked it in multiple ways. And what they keep finding is that no matter which way you tweak it, it actually widens the gap between those who are, it puts those who are further behind, and those who are further ahead. And that on the whole, that formula isn't really effective in that idea of trying to provide equally for all. We still have a system in New York State schools of have and have nots. And that's also directly related to the fact that New York State schools rely upon property tax to make up almost half of a school budget. So, you know, if you live in a wealthy area and they're willing to raise more taxes and overcome their tax cap, they can do more for their children than other areas. So I bring that to your attention for that reason. And I want to talk about the different types of aids. And again, I'll be quick. There's categorical aids. These are like textbooks and computers, software and hardware aid. They're not very large amounts typically in a budget. But this is expense-driven aid. Now, expense-driven aids are really essential aids, especially to upstate schools. And I don't want to make you dizzy, but if you're one of these schools, right, if you're underfunded and you don't live in a wealthy area where people just, hey, you know, let's bust the cap and and go ahead and override it and spend more for our children. So, which none of us are in that situation. So when you're in an upstate New York situation, you can't really rely on property tax income for schools. And you can see that state aid is not the reliable factor either. So this is where you go. You go to your expense-driven aids. So we know that it's building aid, right? But it's also transportation aid, which I've just talked to you about, and BOCES aid. And then you have aids for students with disabilities and private placements. Those are called your highest cost aids. Now, different aids come in at different times. Typically with expense-driven aids, you pay ahead and you get it reimbursed, sometimes a year later. High cost aid sometimes comes in as you're paying it, but you have to pay it forward and then you receive a reimbursement, not necessarily to the total value, but to enough of a value that it makes it worth spending the dollar in that direction. Then there are grants. Federal grants are not the same. They're not subject to the same withholdings that currently New York State is placing on aid. Federal grants like Title I or 611 or 619 are terms you may have Those are not subject to these cuts, but universal pre-K is a state-held grant and is subject to this. So I want to show you this chart. This is New York State's budget. So you can see they have about $27 billion spent in state funding, not property tax levy, toward schools, foundation, in state aid. And what you can see is between 1920 and 2021, they're spending the same amount of money. Very similar. But what they did was pulled out almost like $1.13 billion out of the budget. And they backfilled it with federal stimulus money. Now, the CARES money was meant to be supplemental too. So the idea was that it was supposed to be used to help school districts manage COVID-related expenses. But New York is really in a problem. And at that time, it was really bad for New York. So this is what happened. You'll notice that there is a deduction over here in building aid. But really what that has to do with is that there was a reporting change. Once BOCES building aid could start to be reported within the tax cap calculations for schools, the schools had to go back a year and calculate it as a debt in their books. And so this is just really a reporting change. It's not a significant factor of loss. This is where it's really hurting. So this is a potential impact. Take a look at this. I'm just going to move ourselves around the room again. Sorry. I know you guys can't see what I'm doing, but I'm actually moving your faces everywhere. So if you look at this chart, you can see how the state funding for schools has increased over time. So in 2016-17, it was a little over 24 million. Then last year it was at nearly 28 million. And this is that same chart, just expressed differently. So you see, we're spending the same amount of money. We're getting the same amount of money in state aid, but now the blue portion is actually federal dollars that aren't anticipated to be received next year. So what happens next year or the year after or the year after? So unless there's a plan for the federal government to perpetually fund New York schools by $1.3 billion every year, there's got to be a way for New York to try to replenish that. And that's going to be tricky. So I want to show you the next slide. So I got to move us again. So the 2021 enacted budget granted our Department of Budget. Remember I talked about with Division of Budget and where it was housed in the governor's executive. They can reduce aid allocations to local schools. We've been talking about that. And they can do it based upon these metrics. So in essence, if the budget's considered to be out of balance, if the actual tax receipts coming in are less than 99% of what was estimated to come in as revenue, or if what's actually having to be dispersed out is 101% of the estimated disbursements for any of those measurement periods, which are April 1 through 3, May through June, and July through December. Now, this is why we're going through the 20% withholdings in state aid for the schools. So on August 13th, the Division of Budget released the first quarterly update on the actual New York State budget. And remember how we saw the red chart with the blue box, and I said unless the government was going to perpetually fill it 1.2 billion every year, the state has to figure out how to get that back in. It's not looking pretty. Check this out. So the state budget at that time, Division of Budget in August, showed a 14.5 general fund revenue decline in 1 year. That's what they're saying. It's declining. And the tax receipts are 15.3% down. Overall, they're estimating a loss of 62 billion between now and 2024. So remember, we'd need 1.3 billion a year, and they're down 62 billion across those same years. Now, I think it was the comptroller's office or someone just recently kind of did an audit of this, and their numbers are more positive, but only by a few billion a year. So we're still in like 50 or 48 billion down across 4 years. It's promising, but it's not a saving grace. So the Division of Budget withheld 20% of those expense-driven aids. And they did that from the summer, right? So we're talking like before September. So that was the money that was paid from the previous year, was withheld. And everybody was like up in arms because everyone knew, all the superintendents knew, we have a big aid payment coming in September. And if they cut that, we're dead in the water. We've got to get that aid. And so the governor came out and said, you're all going to get the aid. Now, the truth is they had to give it to schools because it's statutory. It can't be touched. And that's lottery money. It's lottery aid. So the September aid payment came through. So you might think, all right, maybe we can make this work. Well, I want to show you this slide because this is kind of where the concerns continue to build. This is what the state aid that's coming in. And if you look, I'm going to go here first, follow my mouse. These are the state aid payments that were withheld from the previous year, from the previous summer. You can see that in some, although significant, they don't make up the largest amount of state aid. This right here is that really big September aid payment everybody was worried about. Thank God we got it. Look what's coming up. That's pretty significant. Look at that. The largest state aid payments made to schools are in March, and no one knows yet if those are going to be withheld. What we do know is the withholdings of state aid, these withholdings right here, locally, were addressed through attrition. So a lot of our school districts were put in positions where they had to not rehire for staff, and they had to slim down some of their programming because of this shortage. And other districts dipped into their reserves in the hope that they can just get through this year and times will get better. So if we know that people had to exercise attrition for this, what is the potential of something here? Now, this is interesting too. So this is looking at that, if the reductions in 20% go through, look what it does to state aid contribution. So this is the total state aid again, 24 billion up, it climbs up to the nearly 28 billion. It knocks it all the way back down to here. And that means you're down at the same funding levels from state aid for schools that schools were receiving in 2010. It takes us back to the worst years, well, potentially before the GEA, right, of the recession. It's like going back in time over a decade. So what does 2021 ultimately look like? And what will 2021-22 look like? 21-22 is kind of more concerning for us because that's where we don't necessarily have the backfill of the federal stimulus money anymore. So not only are schools absorbing the cuts to state aid, but then they have that whole gap in the budget. So, people are wondering, are there going to be permanent aid cuts and how will that be distributed? That's for this year. And for next year, we're wondering about this. We know that the governor for several years now has proposed that expense-driven aids be capped and merged. And that's been a problem for many upstate school districts. Remember the scatter plot with the orange dots I showed everyone? It's that problem because if you can't get it in tax revenue and you can't get it from state aid, you're already underfunded there, then what do you do? So that's always been a big pushback to cap those aids. But now I don't know that that's going to happen. I don't know that that pushback will be realized. So then the question is, in what way will those be capped, or will it all be merged and capped? And how will it be capped? Probably 2 years back. We're probably going to go back to the 2018 spending thresholds and cap it. Now that affects BOCES, right? So it means that we have to start really thinking about, for school districts, $1 spent at BOCES will only get so much money in return no matter what. So if you're capped at this much, if you normally get, X amount of dollars back from a BOCES, even if you continue to spend above it, you're still only going to get X amount of dollars back from the BOCES. Now, truthfully, I think in light of that, still a district is going to want to leverage BOCES services because those are shared costs. So even though you're not going to generate any additional revenue potentially from those expenditures, what you do have is the benefit of sharing the cost, the benefit of sharing the cost of employees and salaries and materials and goods. So it's still good for the dollar. But in terms of programs for children, this may change things. And it may require us to be very savvy about what we offer, working really hand in hand with the districts on that, and having to get very strategic in how we offer things. So we may have to program differently, provide the same programs, but maybe in a different way to make them more cost effective and yet still provide what the kids need. And then the question was, how will new reporting be utilized in the budget process? So schools have to report now 2 transparency reports on how they spend their money. And one goes to the governor's office and one goes to SED. And there's concerns that maybe that reporting might be kind of like leveraged in a way to say, see, schools don't need as much money as they've been getting from New York State because they're spending it all on X elementary school and not their own high school, which is disingenuous and not true. But that's a thought right now that's out there. So this was from State Aid. Questar 3 did this for us as the superintendents, and they shared it with us so we could share it with our boards. And I wanted to bring it to your attention because I know that not all of us are on boards right now. And I know I'm writing about this in the weekly updates, but I thought this was a great way to kind of bring it all together and make sense for us to see it. So I'd like to open it to questions or discussion if any board members have some thoughts.
It's an eye opener.
Yeah, it really is.
Pat, back in 2008, the Great Recession, we also had the problem of the stock market going down. And that kind of crushed the teacher retirement thing. And that was an extra burden on the schools. Is any of that forecasted?
No, I haven't heard of any significant increases to TRS at this time. Tom, have you heard of anything like that yet?
No, the stock market's, at a record pace. So at this point, their return, I'm sure, is fine.
Yeah.
So Trish.
Yes, Russ.
Thank you. That's, we've been living this for a few years now, and we also see this writing on the wall, and wondering how BOCES, can assist before it really becomes critical. And I was talking to you the other day about SROs and the county's not going to help us with that anymore. And I don't know if BOCES can write a COSER for that, but it's little things like that that's really going to help us on our budgets. But
yeah,
and there's a lot of little things like that that maybe we can talk about and start to prioritize. I don't know what the next step is.
Right, and that brings us to our next piece. So this isn't a programmatic next step. This is the budget next step. So in light of everything you've seen, we're really concerned about the future of money for education. And next year, we're very, very concerned about that year. So in budget development, both in the internal aspects of our budget, and right now we're thinking in the external aspect of our budget, we're looking to go out flat. 0% increases on unit costs to the greatest extent possible. We recognize that this might not entirely be possible everywhere. So let me give some examples. If I'm providing a service that's not staff heavy, I might be able to go to a 0% increase on unit cost and absorb it within the budget with little changes to program, especially if there was any wiggle room in that budget in the first place. But if I'm in a heavily staffed budget, that your 0% increase in a unit cost could mean a change in programming that the superintendents may or may not support because they might need it, right? So if it means I have to drop related services, I could see superintendents going, whoa, wait a minute, I need speech and OT and PT. And I don't say that as an example of something we're planning on doing. I'm just giving an example. So we as the senior council are going to be working internally on really looking at what would it mean if we went out 0% on our unit costs? Where can we achieve it? And where might we not be able to achieve it? And if it looks difficult, what might that mean, right? So if we have to look at a 0% increase in a place that has heavy staff, how could we do that differently and still meet needs? Because that might be doable. And the superintendents might say we like it. Or maybe it's not doable. And so that program will still have an increase on cost. We also hope to work with our superintendents on that. So we use committee structures to do that. And we'll still be going along that way. We might have to actually move up when we meet in committees with the superintendents to go over the programming. So we're going to ask internally for our faculty to start really looking, those who are responsible for that portion of the organization, to start really looking at the potential impact of a 0% increase on the unit costs. What does that mean? And how might it look differently? So then we can meet with the superintendents and talk about that with them and see where they're like, yep, we're good to go, or nope, keep that unit cost the same, or we understand if it has to increase even, which means that we can't uniformly apply it across the whole organization. So our budget we can't simply say across the organization, we think this year we're gonna look at a 2% increase across all portions of the budget. We're going to really try to be strategic with this, more like surgeons with scalpels. We think that might be the appropriate way forward. So I didn't know if anyone, Tom, did you want to speak to that at all, and our ability to do it, or if any board members have any questions?
Dr. Kilburn.
Yes.
I just want to mention, particularly in the previous thing you were just talking about in budget, I don't want to introduce any deep state conspiracies here, but for the last period of time, and my friend Mr. Stewart may be more aware of this than I am, for the last period of time, there have been movements within the state to bring about certain changes to our entire educational system in the state, vis-a-vis regionalization, district consolidation, and so forth. I could see where this budget crunch would be an ideal way to bring about some of those agendas that we've kind of shoved them aside because by and large, the educational community doesn't want them, but that they could use this budget issue as a way to bring those things about. And I just want to make sure it's someplace in your, and kind of keep an eye on that.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see what does the future of education look like for us. You know, I think there have been in some cases certain prohibitions to what we can do in education based on reasons that maybe aren't student-centered. We all could agree on that. We've seen things like that happen. And I think we've also seen situations where there are educational possibilities that have merit, but people don't necessarily pull the trigger on them. And I agree with you, Gary. I think that this environment is going to possibly shake that up. And there could be some great outcomes to that. There could be some nefarious goings on that we have to be aware of. And there could be some real downsides to some of these options. So I certainly think that collaboration and leadership is going to be really important, especially across this region when we look at our schools and how we help them.
One way that, I'm sorry, someone wants to speak.
Yep, I apologize, Gary. Russ was next, and you'll be after that.
Well, Gary, first of all, I want to thank you for bringing that up, because that is extremely important. Trish, in your previous presentation, you were talked about expense-driven aid being frozen, and you used the 2018 mark. And I'm hearing that here and there, but
I have no reason. I just picked
nobody
it.
really knows where that threshold is going to be.
Correct.
And so I want to take that theory to this, and I appreciate the effort of being flat, but clearly understand if that means I will only receive the same revenue from BOCES if I stay in those same programs that I received in the previous year, correct?
It would depend. Yes, that is possible. So you might, so it depending on how this lands, right? So staff heavy programs may not see a 0% increase, right? So if the superintendent say, no, those have to continue to increase at special ed services, clearly we understand that. You might have to rethink purchasing strategy in terms of anticipated revenue and anticipated aid. So you're correct in this way, Russ. If you continue to purchase exactly what you purchased in previous years and the same quantity of those purchases, then yes, you would see your potential revenue flatten out, and that is of concern. And that's certainly something we'll work with the superintendents on, because they might say, don't do it. But another option is to buy more volume. So by investing more in different things, then you can possibly still generate revenue in return. Understandably, Waterville may not be in a position, as many districts, to have the luxury to do that. And I think that's why it's going to be important for us to work with our cabinet of superintendents when we talk about this.
But then I'm gonna go back to the example I gave you before, that services that we're not buying through BOCES, that we could possibly buy through BOCES, like the SROs and those things that are coming off of other funding. And I think that's where the attention needs to be put on the BOCES. Because
new COSERs.
Well, I'm sure all of us will buy into, who's using SROs will buy into that. But it's that type of thinking that is going to increase our spending with BOCES. But we're going to have to be creative on that end.
I would agree. We will be. We'll have to be creative. Dr. Porcelli.
If I may add and kind of piggyback on what Mr. Stewart has said, two issues that kind of are rising up in my own mind are, one, you kind of indicated that the state ed department is almost being treated like a stepchild as far as the state and the state budget is being concerned. They're not being consulted or kind of, oh yeah, guys, we forgot. That's one thing. The other thing is, I am noticing the relative ease, unless I misunderstand what I'm hearing and seeing, the relative ease with which the pattern of instruction we have followed for about the last 100 years with this class step and instruction at certain levels, and you move up to the levels, move up through the levels, and ostensibly when you get to be a high school senior, we've given you the knowledge you need. That is being obviated. Just the latest example is the dismissal of the January regents. And certainly there's reason for that, but the relatively easy dismissal of that and the relatively ease with which we've been looking at how classroom instruction and that step process is going, it looks to me like picking up on what Mr. Stewart said again, changing our program. It looks like there may be an entire revamping in the philosophy of education that we're following. I thought I'd just mention that as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stunned into silence, folks.
That's an excellent point, Dr. Porcelli. And I think that the conversation, the points everybody is making, are making, it's very insightful. And I think we're on a new horizon in education now. Unless a money fairy, drops in everybody's laps, who knows? But yeah, we're not gonna be able to move forward in the same way. I don't think. Not if what we're seeing financially really actually occurs. I think we are going to have to start thinking dynamically about education. So your points are excellent. Thank you. So without hearing differently, I'd like to move on to the next part of the report, which has to do with our retreat and our thought exchange. We talked about having a virtual portion of the retreat where we would pose a question. We have like a two-parter to all of you via email, and you would contribute your thoughts. And the idea is that you would click on the link and you'd read the question and type in your answer. But don't stop there. Thought exchanges are kind of exciting, but they do require that you revisit that link. So we're going to open up a window from, I think, like soon to early December. Ann Turner has the specific dates. And during that time, we're going to ask you to keep clicking that link and keep going back into the thought exchange to read what each other had to say and to kind of put stars on the things you agree with, and you can add more thoughts. Like just kind of a dialogue we just had, you can actually do through something called thought exchange. Now, thought exchange is really neat because all of your information and dialogue is tracked into data that you yourselves will be able to use in our retreat, in our in-person, hopefully in-person remainder of our retreat in the future. So I'm going to share the screen to kind of bring that up so you can see that, and Ann Turner can walk us through the thought exchange. Let me just see if I can get out of this. There we go. Bear with me, everybody. I want to get into the Mozilla, and there we go, thought exchange.
Hey, while Trish is getting that ready, let me talk just a little bit about thought exchange. And at your retreat, you're going to need some information, some data, some input. And one of the groups we believe you would like input from is the superintendent's group. So tomorrow at their meeting, we will be letting them know that they will be receiving an invitation to participate in thought exchange. And at the same time, we will also be sending an invitation to the board members. So I would anticipate that tomorrow afternoon, the invitations to thought exchange would go out to both the board and to the superintendents. Beyond that, thought exchange is really quite a simple process. They have a tagline that envisions 3 steps to it, and that is share, star, and discover. So the share portion is your opportunity to share your thoughts, as Dr. Kilburn just talked about, in response to a question. And the question is, as you can see on the screen, what do component districts need from OHM BOCES to best support students and districts in a way that's different than before? Looking forward, what should the OHM BOCES be adding? What should they be changing, deleting, and or continuing? So that is the share portion. And Dr. Kilburn, I did share a couple thoughts. I don't know if you can get.
Just want to remind people that it is confidential. So
yes.
If I'm sharing away, so if I totally disagree, I'm like, that's appalling, I disagree. It doesn't say Dr. Kilburn just said. It doesn't, it's confidential.
It's confidential and your identity is never shown.
And we're mixed with the supers, correct? Or no, are we?
No, yours will be separate from.
Okay. Okay, because I feel like I could identify some of them.
So sleuthy.
I'm just kidding. I don't want them to identify me is really the thing.
I think you can identify some of the board members if they talk too, so.
Probably could, Gary, good point.
Maybe
So,
a flaw in the process. I'm not sure. We'll see in the end. So
you go ahead.
Dr. Kilburn mentioned you can revisit it several times and add your thoughts as you go along and as you react to other people's thoughts. But there is a 300 character limit, which comes very fast, as I found out when I was responding to the question.
So share a thought now. So I could share a thought. What do component districts need from OHM BOCES to best support? I'm just going to hit test, 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 and we're just going to see that, unfortunately. Oh, they're going to think that's about testing. I'm just going to write, this is a test of thought, if I could spell it correctly, on where we're live streaming. Okay.
And if you go right, click on star.
Okay.
Okay, so this is the star portion. So if you strongly disagree, or as I prefer to look at it, it's not as important to you is a 1. If you strongly agree or you feel it's very important, that's 5 stars. Sort of like a restaurant review.
And this is pretty cool. Is this like a Microsoft software program? What is this?
No, the Thought Exchange is a separate software program by a vendor.
Hopefully we will apply what we have learned to create better learning experience. The goal is always increase student achievement.
So that was something I entered this afternoon.
Oh,
So would have.
I didn't want to do that.
Second one.
How do I give you 5 stars? Do I go here?
Okay, very good.
I hit this one, but it only gave you 1 star and I want to give you 5.
That's all right. I can deal with it.
No, I'm devastated. Oh, see? Okay, so board, did you see what I just did? If you click on this star, you're giving them 1. Ouch. But if you go over here, that's all of them and it lights all of them. So this would light up 4, this would light up 3, and this would light up 2. So what will happen next for our districts? Effective change. I'm confused by what that means, Anne, so I'm going to put a...
It means that my question or my statement was, my thought was after remote learning, what will happen next for our districts? And it always asks you, after you write your thought, it asks you, why is it important? So my why is it important is because we need effective change.
Gotcha. Okay, so I'll rate that with 3 stars. And this is that's me, test of thought exchange. Very boring. When we say 1 star, it's not important to me. And then this meter will fill as you rate the thoughts. And then you can see this on your way out the door. And you're done. You've participated in an exchange.
Right.
So we'd ask you to keep going back in and contributing.
Absolutely.
So, I'm sorry.
And this will produce for us a report of sorts, and that's their discover part. So they've collected data. It can be in various forms. The report out can be in various forms, and we will be prepared to give you that data at your December board meeting.
Okay, so I'm going to stop the share. So Anne, if I try to do this from home and I'm confused, how can I get some help? What do I do?
You can get some help because myself or one of my team members from my office is going to be calling each and every one of you to see if you have had any problems logging into Thought Exchange. And if so, we'll be happy to walk you through the process. So no, we'll be reaching out to all of you.
Okay, Steve, do you have a question?
Now, I was going to ask you if there's going to be somebody that's going to be coaching or even, you know, like a moderator to help prod. I could see even someone to remind because, you know, with our busy lives, you want everybody to participate. You know, it's like one of those meetings where 3 people talk and 6 people don't. You don't know if the 6 people aren't talking because they can't get a word in edgewise or they don't want to participate. You don't really know, but it would be, for this to be really useful, it'll be good if somebody's prodding all of us to make sure, because I could see getting away from him for a week or 2 and then saying, why hasn't he responded? It's nothing personal. You just forget or what have you.
I agree.
No problem. We'll be calling you.
Fair enough. Fair enough. All right. So that ends the district superintendent's report. It was a long one tonight. But Mr. Boucher, I am done.
Awesome. Good, good, good. All right. That moves us on to the next portion of our meeting where we need to get a motion to approve our consent agenda of sections B, C, and D.
Mr. Boucher.
Yes.
Mr. Boucher, Gary, I have 2 questions prior to, if I may. They're relatively minor, no surprises, but I'd just like some clarification on 2 items in the consent agenda before we approve it.
Sure.
May I?
Absolutely.
My first question is on page 81 in the booklet, we have some letters of resignation for some positions, 8-1. And what I'm noticing is, just trying to get them myself, those pages, those are for people who are resigning, but there is no last name. So the first question I have is, Are they legal? There's that one on 81, and I believe the one on 82. They're both resignations from positions, but I don't know who's resigning. I was able to backtrack it from the list, but I'm just asking that question. That's the first one.
So I do see on page 82 a last name.
Yeah.
But on page, yep. But on page 81, to your point, I don't see a last name. I do know that we have a record of it though, because it was sent in email. We would just have to go back. You can see that Kate Dorr had forwarded the email to Deb Kimball. So we could just go back into Kate's email and retrieve the last name. So
okay.
We have access to that.
And the one on 8.2, the name I'm looking at under forwarded messages, that is the person that we're dealing with?
Correct.
Or is that, okay.
Yes.
Then I'm okay on that one. Just wanted to make sure. The second question I have is on page 168, which is part of the contract for the college. There are several pages, and Mrs. Kimball is super at putting in, this page was intentionally left blank. But in this case, there are several items, exhibit A, B, and so forth. And there's nothing there to indicate. And sneaky person that I am, I don't want somebody filling something in after we approve it. So how do I proceed? It's 168. I'm sorry, am I on the right?
Yeah, no, you are, and you're looking at the exhibits. Exhibit A, unique provisions by law or applicable licensing accrediting bodies where the any unique provisions regarding the location, regarding health medical information required by the facility, that would be us, regarding any individual student's plan or clinical instructors providing the services.
Yeah, we afford our acceptance to this. We accept it in our consent agenda, and there's nothing there that someplace on the road, somebody could add something in and say, oh, the board approved this. So I am concerned about that. Maybe we could just make it an addendum to the minutes that this was approved and those pages were blank, or are you anticipating something to be added at a later date?
Well, actually, regarding individual students' plans, Chris, these are for these aren't for student teaching, these are for services, correct?
Yeah, typically our contract with Utica College is for therapists.
So
for OT and PT.
So if there was anything in connection with an individual student's plan, what you wouldn't see is any record of that individual student's plan reflected with any particular contract. It wouldn't be, because that's the IEP document, which is a different one. But maybe what we could do is ask for something to say I think we could probably do something to indicate that exhibits A through, amended to indicate that exhibits A through D are blank. Something along that line. Gary, you're muted, Dr. Porcelli.
In that case, I will move the consent agenda and add to that motion that those pages A through D are considered to be in blank, and that way none can be added afterwards.
Yep.
Is that acceptable?
But doesn't that, I mean, those exhibits they don't show up in our contract with them, but they show up in the process in what's being done. True? Are they in reference?
They seem to be, Mrs. Fowler, they seem to be part of the contract we're approving. It doesn't say they're separate. So if we could just indicate that the sense of the board in approving this is that those pages are blank pages and intentionally blank, it covers my issue. And if there's a problem later on, we can bring it up.
I'll second the motion.
Yeah, I don't think it means like, so for example, Elaine, if there were situations regarding a student's individual plan, I think because it says Exhibit A, individual student's plan, it would allow you to still practice that portion of the contract, right? Still exercise that. But
Right.
it also indicates that this page is intentionally left blank, so that to Dr. Porcelli's point, no one can try to add something particular.
No, right. It's intentionally kept blank, but it's
For a
somewhere
reason.
else to be used in what's being done.
Right.
So
Yeah, so-
if we have 20 students, there's 20 of them.
So I
That's
think
good.
if
Yeah.
we just indicate intentionally blank, we should be okay.
Intentionally blank covers it.
Yep, I think so.
Yeah.
Okay, so Russ, Steve, did you get, I couldn't remember who motioned or seconded or whatever.
Russ,
second.
Russ second.
Okay.
Okay. So now with those changes, we need to go back, get a motion for approval for consent agenda B, C, and D, right?
I have moved A, B, C, and D, Mr. Boucher.
You have, and Russ second. Okay, all in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Hearing none, motions carry. All right.
And-
now
Mr. Boucher, I'll ask the minutes.
Oh, hang on, Deb's-
We
Excuse me,
change that.
sorry, Mr. Boucher, could we approve the minutes of October 14th?
Oh, my goodness. Thank you.
Thank
Oh, my
you.
silly, I jumped right over that. All right, yeah, thank you, Deb. All right, we would need a motion to approve the minutes of the regular meeting for October 14th, 2020. That's on page 15. Can we get a motion?
So move.
Moved by Ms.
Second.
Second by Mr. Salerno. Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thank you, Deb. All right, we're moving right along here. So we move on to section number 8, board topics, discussion. So go ahead. Dr. Kilburn, do you want to lead us through this?
Well, it's board discussion. I think it's just a call out that if anybody who attended the NISBA conference virtually wants to share anything they picked up or learned in that conference, this would be the time to do so. I can certainly add that I did. You still have an open window. I think it's until, I'm trying to remember when the course is closed down, but because it's virtual, if you were
End
enrolled.
of December.
End of December. Thank you, Russ. I did go to pre-law. It was really interesting and it had a lot to do with what's going on. Some of it with COVID, some of it with labor law. It was really interesting for me to see how a conference could work in Zoom, and I actually really liked it because you know what? I didn't get blocked out of a session and I can see it later on. But to others who attended, would you like to share out?
Yeah, I'm going to share out. I'm still going back and forth when I have time to pick up. That's what I like most about this virtual is, and you can go back on your time, and it's for the same amount of money. So, you know, we get 6 weeks to play with all those, and you if you want to go to all of them, you could go to all of them. It's pretty cool.
It is. It's really neat.
Is it possible that if Moore attended as our delegate, because I noticed Mrs. Irvin is not here, could he give us a report? I think we had an item that we wish to amend.
Mike, were you able to participate as the delegate to the business meeting?
I did not participate as a delegate. Yvonne did.
Okay.
You'll have to
So
catch up with her.
we'll probably have to catch up with Yvonne, but I will tell you that Deb Kimball did a great job. She reached out to school boards. They did give her the paperwork to write our proposed changes to the motion regarding pilot agreements. And we did submit those for consideration. So it would be neat to hear how that was presented on the floor. I agree. That's pretty neat.
Very cool. Okay, so that is our report out for the School Board Association Virtual Convention thus far. And how about the BOCES Consortium on Continuing Education, the Policy Board meetings?
So in the back of your book, the policy board did meet and there are notes about that. And Mr. Salerno and Mr. Nelson did attend. If you guys have any questions about the notes that anyone can ask. And Mr. Nelson or Mr. Salerno, if you have any comments to make, now would be the time to make them.
John, do you want to take it? Say anything?
So you froze up a little bit, Gary, but I think he said, John, if you want to take it, do you have anything?
Yes, anything? No?
Right. Yeah, I basically, if you think BOCES has got problems, you should seek continuing ed. They're basically missing a lot of direction on what to do. They know what they can't do, but they don't know how to go forward. And they seem to be the stepchild of education. You kicked me off?
I did. I kicked you off. I'm just trying to conserve your bandwidth, Mr. Nelson. We can hear you with the video off. We couldn't.
Done.
Okay. So, Gary, your face was freezing up, so I think he put you onto camera off so we can still hear you. So to Gary's point. Okay.
Yeah, I'm still on one of these Chromebooks, which
I get it. So in the meeting with the BOCES Consortium of Continuing Education, they're really struggling with the remote learning. So imagine trying to teach literacy to students. The students can't come in, they're adult students. They're trying to learn how to learn English or also learn how to read. And yet they can't come in for in-person instruction. And there's this weird rule that they're not allowed to receive virtual instruction. So where a kindergarten teacher can try to work with kindergarten children like we're doing now, the adult students are not allowed to have that because of the way that the government has structured that programming. So they're really trying to overcome significant challenges in how they're supporting certainly people with skills development, and then also the impact on the adult students attending like career and tech ed programs, because the pandemic shut them down last spring. So they're now looking at the fall, this current time of year, and trying to bring back the spring students to allow them to come back in and during the fall to finish their coursework. And of course, now what do we just do? Went remote. So I would agree with Gary's summation that it's like our challenges and in some ways even more significant.
So it sounds like they're going to lose all this time, and like they're on pause basically with their education.
Trying to do it, they're really trying, and they have some students who are really working with them, but it has made a significant impact. And I will say that in spite of that, with the programming they're able to retain and the students they're able to continue serving, they're doing some nice things. But COVID really has set them back. It really has set all of us back. But you see it there more, I think, because it's a very small and needy population.
Right. Yeah, there's certainly going to be some aspects of teaching and learning that are going to be much more difficult in this environment.
Yeah. Yep, for sure.
Okay. Well, great. Thank you very much for that. Now we move on to old business, which we have none. So then after old business, we can move to executive session. Do we have executive session tonight, Doctor?
We do, and if you'll notice, it's the second row down on the packet, so you'd have to read in exactly what it says.
Gotcha. So we will go into executive session to discuss matters that may lead to the appointment of a particular person or alternative or a particular corporation. So that's what we're going to executive session for.
Wonderful. So Scott Morris is going to shuttle us all over into our break room. And oh, Deb Kimball, you have a question? Oh, you have to get a motion and stuff on that, don't you? Sorry.
Yes,
so
please.
We'll need a motion to go into an executive session for discussion matters that may lead to the appointment of a particular person. And that was moved by Dr. Porcelli and second by Mr. Salerno, I think.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you, John. Okay, we can go to executive.
So Scott is going to move us over. Deb and Scott, you're going to have to hang out. And they'll move us all in, so you don't have to touch anything. Just hang in there and you're gonna find yourself in a secret room, a virtual room for executive session.
We're being sent to our room.
We are.
Charlene, John, you should see an invite. There you go. John, you're gonna have to click on it. John, do you see the pop-up asking you to move?
What?
Do you see the window asking you to agree to move into the breakout room?
It's like you join the break room.
Click on that with your mouse. There you go. All right, so I guess we just sit and wait. So I'm going to turn off my camera and video.
We're still streaming live?
Yeah.
Okay.
We're back.
We're back.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn, Dave.
That's Russ.
Second.
Motion to adjourn by, I think,
Russ.
Russ. And we need a second by
Second.
Gary Nelson. Thank you for the second. All right, that's it. Meeting adjourned. Have a great night, everyone. Thank you.